welcome to the Relearn Game Changers podcast wrap-up series for 19 November 2020. What are we going to call today? Are we going to call it a new hope or three beards and a man bun? I'm really not sure in and around this, but I tell you what, I'm super excited, Adriano. We've got guests from Jerusalem and Brazil and Sao Paulo and Brazil with us today. So that makes Sao Paulo, Jerusalem, Wallara, and Sunshine West. I'm excited, Adriano. Let's go.
Well, it's great to be again with you, Phil. And for our listeners, just off air, our Phil and our two guests, Andrew and George, were having a beard off appreciation. I was feeling a bit of an imposter just here, just with my little kind of 5 o'clock stubble. But we're going to hand it over to our two great guests, one in Jerusalem, one in Sao Paulo. I continue to be energized by the fact that Relearn brings so many people from across the globe together, which for me in itself is hopeful that we have this kind of collective humanity that tomorrow can be a better day than it is today. George, can you introduce yourself to our listeners, please?
Yes, of course. Hi. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm George Stein. I'm Brazilian. I'm here in São Paulo. And I'm here in Relearn and talking to you because I realized that after graduating from a production engineering course, what I really want to do is to be a learning engineering and help schools and people develop and learn in more effective way. And that's what I'm working on right now.
Thank you very much, George. Over to you, Andrew.
Hey, hi everyone. I'm Andrew Watson. I'm currently the director of the Jerusalem American School, a K through 12, 950 student school in East Jerusalem. But I've come here really with a carte blanche or a tabula rasa, a blank canvas, to reimagine how the school functions in relation to sustainability and peace education. So I also run an organization called Sustainability Education. And I came into contact with Brian Gibson of Relearn, and I was just very, very excited about the synergies that brought us together. And I'm particularly excited about what's been happening in Relearn, and excited to talk a little bit more about that.
So much of the Relearn Festival has been great enlightenment for us all that have been participating. And we've been exposed to individuals from, as I said, from the top of the show, from across the globe, that have been sharing so much of not only their thinking, but of course their practice and what's been in action. For me, on this penultimate kind of wrap-up show, it is one that is deeply hopeful. So I want to start from that construct of hope. And if the construct of hope isn't created for the times such as we're living in right now, I don't know when it is. If we are open to adopting a hopeful and optimistic heart, we can breathe easier and expect more from a pleasant future, one that our young people in our schools are ultimately going to inherit and ultimately going to lead. Humanity appears to be at the front of its own limits and degradation at the moment and affecting all of creation and one another. And we kind of need to lift and shift our ways to new existence, this sense of becoming into a new era, maybe the age of the human or whatever we want to call it. George, what makes you hopeful right now?
Well, I think that the fact that we are here from people all over the world talking about the new learning paradigm, and we have a lot of things that my perspective is that we know a lot of where do we want to go and where do we want to get. And I think my hope is that we have these places where we want to be, or where we want our schools, our students, our children to be. Our big challenge is how do we get there? And I have hope that we are developing, like, how can I say, an integration of a lot of knowledge from different fields, like change management, people development, neuroscience, schooling, learning science, that it's really helping us to integrate all of those things to help us get there. Because we knew this, we saw these days here, that we have a lot of good examples all over the world, like in K-12, in universities, in informal learning, whatever. And I think I'm hopeful that we are inspired, we are energetic, and we have means to get there.
Andrew, to speak of hope in a time of kind of comfort is often trivial, but to speak of hope when the situation is kind of dire, as the world grapples with, the pandemic of COVID-19, kind of makes a very audacious claim, the idea of hope. What are you hopeful about?
Well, before I get to hope, let me talk to you a little bit about how we work with the idea in relation to our andragogical and pedagogical model in sustainability education. And we follow a guy called Otto Scharmer's U theory. And the whole purpose of this is to actually drag people down into despair purposefully and to say, look, hold on, let's have a realistic, cosmetic-free view of what the world is like now and how desperate the position is. And whether we like it or not, the position is actually pretty desperate. COVID-19 might be an accelerator, but it's also maybe a precursor. So we have a very concerted and heartfelt look, like we did today, at how desperate the situation is in terms of in terms of the environment and other connected dimensions, because we have to think systemically as well. And then after that, we say, well, hold on a minute, education is part of the problem. Education has by no means had a successful run at things. It's had a troubled past, a checkered career. So we say, well, what are the problems with education? And only then, upon consideration of the darkness of the position we're in and the idea that education is part of the problem, can we emerge by collaborating, by connecting, by thinking and working together about where the hope is and where the light emerges. And that's really the essence of what sustainability education does. And that's also how we've started developing ideas about a new type of school, which certainly draws on some of the ideas we've just been talking about, and also looks to the future about a different kind of education, which is not dependent on places or school buildings, and acknowledges that learning will forever be digital, but also recognizes that learning should be project-based, inquiry-led, and should be socialized according to stage, not by age, and framed by the SDGs. Because if you've got a concerted number of people developing an extraordinary idea about SDGs, then surely they need to frame the future of education. And that's what we've been doing. And that's where the hope lies.
If we look at, gentlemen, if we look at the idea of hope, there has to be something real that sits behind it. It's more than just a promise. There needs to be an understanding that there will be delivery that sits behind it, outside of your own spheres of influence and experience in every day at the festival. What's one idea that you've seen at the festival that gives you hope for the future of education? We might start with George, and then we'll go to Andrew.
Okay, I'll take advantage that Andrew mentioned U theory from Otto Scharmer that I like and work a lot of. And there's a little quote from, I think it's William O'Brien, that says, I think I have it now, not to mistake, the success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. So I think that what I saw here in the Relearn Festival is that we have a very good amount of energetic people with good interior and hoping anyone in each experience and schools and settings, but really with the, how can I say, the true intention, emotional intention to do something different, to do something for the future tomorrow, not in a 20 years period. So I think this is, for me, it's really great. And I'm just finishing my doctorate in education, and I feel the very big difference that we have in academic world and the practical world right now in these 2 weeks, and it's amazing. And I'm really excited to put these things together, because I think that we have to have some kind of scientific action research on these whole things that we are doing, like we can say project-based learning, phenomenal-based learning, or whatever-based learning that makes a lot of sense to connect real world with the content and with the skills that we want children to develop. And so I think I saw a lot of people just thinking about this in different ways in this 1-2 weeks festival, and it's great.
What about you, Andrew? What have you seen at the festival? Thank you, George. And what have you seen, Andrew?
I'm particularly enthused by a couple of guys who I listened into. First, a young lady called Aisha Faisal, who is radical as she is unapologetic in her challenge of orthodoxy. So when, for instance, we were having a conversation about the nature of sustainability education, her first challenge was to say that we were just another potential challenge, I should say, with respect to Aisha, was just we were potentially just another example of a post-colonialist imposition of ideas of education. And I take that idea very, very seriously. And so, as she is so passionate and committed to things like social justice and equality, especially in relation to the Rohingya, where she's been developing a program, I'm absolutely committed to reappraising the way I work according to the way she thinks, and I think that's one of the models of adaptability and influence that an experience like the Relearn Festival brings. It brings an acknowledgement that we need to learn from each other, and age and stage are not an impediment to that. So I've learned a lot from Aisha in this festival. Similarly, from a lady called Amy McConnell Franklin, who holds well-being and mindfulness practice at the heart of everything that she does. And I think if we're going to move towards an idea and a concept that humans and human flourishing is at the center of a future of education, then we need to think very carefully about the impact of that on approaches to teaching and learning, about how we learn, and indeed what we learn as we move forward. If we're going to move, as the late and lamented Jonathan Sachs suggested, from ideas of I towards we.
So that sounds very much like the work that we've been doing around an education for character competency and wellness, where we talk about the journey from me to you to us, which is that natural developmental journey that sees us realize a sense of purpose in what we do, because we're able to connect with something that goes beyond ourselves. So we go from the self-centeredness of a small child to the group focus of the adolescent, and then ultimately, hopefully, the selflessness of an adult. What is it that we can be doing to promote selflessness in schools around the world today, apart from being careful not to be post-colonial and appreciating the state that we're in right now? Where's the beacon in terms of selflessness? What's in it for kids that's positive and that will give them hope in their voice and agency in the future? Andrew?
I think I'll bring, if I may, an example from my current school in Jerusalem. And it's a very good metaphor. So when I first arrived, I entered a couple of rooms, and I wasn't entirely sure what the rooms were for, but under a bed of rubbish and chairs and tables, I identified a couple of pianos. And I said to the guys in the school, can we rescue these pianos? And it is true that the school had been described to me as unloved, as a little bit shabby. It's a little bit as like a desert had been unwatered, and there were seeds that were dormant but needed to be brought to the surface. So I brought the pianos out, and as I was doing so, one of my colleagues said to me, "But Mr. Andrew, we can't have the pianos in the lobby because the students will want to play it." I said, "I know they will. I want them to. That is what it is there for. I want them to play the piano." And I think that idea of nurturing, just nurturing at the very most elemental level of being, the idea that you can contribute and explore and experiment in freedom and safety, and with a sense of hope and being nurtured in that spirit, is something that brings forth something very special and elemental in young people. And So in one of my most recent articles, I talked about having human relationships, holding human relationships at the center of any organizational model. And what it means is to treat that human relationship centrally, and to understand that sometimes we don't have a good day, but we must always work towards a better day. That if there was any guiding idea, that is, we're only as good as our last day, and we need to always understand that we can be better as we move forward. And if that's a central working model, then humanity must be at the center of that. But even to go a little bit further, schools exist for students, and there can be no compromise in that central significant idea.
It's really interesting, George, listening to what Andrew is sharing there about great optimism in many ways, that we're almost on a threshold of a new era of where we're going to be coexisting, where a deep sense of belonging and wellness is central to our new ecosystem, where sustainable living is also part of that construct. And what I'm also hearing is this idea of fraternal humanism, this return to us as opposed to I. And so, George, what's your perspective of this, of what you think is the optimistic way forward for us in education?
I like the idea that we have to move from the ego to the eco. And also thinking about school and thinking about curriculum, we have to look at the human part of it, not only in the students, but also in the school community around it. And so I think we have to be able to connect in a stronger sense, in a meaningful way, the challenge that we have in society just around the corner or around the school walls with what's happening inside the curriculum, inside the schools. And I think it's a very strong way to connect and to start from the self to bigger society. And I think that's the way. I don't know other way to do it.
Andrew, what do you think of that idea of connecting from the self to the bigger society?
Well, I rather liked what George had to say. He put it very succinctly, from ego to eco. I think the first thing we need to do is understand and recognize that ecosystem. Had an interesting conversation in my most recent workshop early this evening. And we were talking about sustainable models and the scientific evidence that should inform our practice in education. And there was a lady from Alberta in Canada, and she said, "For hold on a minute, we've had savanna for millennia, and our animals have been living freely in these areas for ages. So why are you talking against the meat industry?" I mean, it's a good question, but the material point is that if we live sustainably, then other than the biological arguments against how our metabolism deals with meat, that's a different argument. Living within our own sustainable dimensions, and we need to, perhaps just have a very significant and coherent understanding of what sustainability means, which means we live in systems which are self-perpetuating. So that's okay. But in terms of education, what it means is that our systems need to reflect our ecosystem. And the ecosystem, as evinced, as described, as explored and articulated by the Sustainable Development Goals, creates an extraordinarily coherent model for education. But then, so one of my frustrations is that there hasn't hitherto, we've been trying to do this with sustainability education and our schools that we're developing, to develop a framework which is absolutely defined and designed in relation to the SDGs. Why wouldn't it be? Why wouldn't you draw on the expertise and the research over 10 to 15 years by experts in the field in independent and connected ways? That's the future. That's the sustainable school.
I really love the idea of drawing on the research and the evidence and constructing frameworks that are based on that. I think we need to be mindful at the end of the day that everything that we're doing, we can build a school, whether it's a virtual or a physical construct or a communal construct. We can design a framework, we can have all the principles at mind, but unless we equip, empower and enable students to be well first, and then to go into the world with the adaptive expertise and the self-efficacy to actually to make their purpose come alive, then we won't get anywhere. And unless we can help them to align their sense of purpose with that broader field, it's going to be a real challenge. I mean, I just can't help but think that what makes a difference in the lives of our students and what's going to help them to lead good lives within the sorts of frameworks, gentlemen, that you're talking about, and the sorts of understandings that you're talking about, lives that are worthwhile and well lived. It's about whether or not we can help them to live a life of purpose, and to connect that purpose from me to you to us, to connect it to the broader world, to live in that world, to thrive in that world, to live, to learn, to lead, to work in that world with all of the humility and courage and kindness to take that big step forward and up themselves. It's I think it's salient for us to remember at all times that it's about what they're learning and then what they're going to go and do with the world. That's the point of what we do. What do you think, Adriana?
Look, I really appreciate what you just said there, particularly about this notion of for me, to you, to us. And I know that is something that at School for Tomorrow that's deeply embedded in our work. I particularly love what George had to say around this kind of new perspective of living differently, in the sense that we need to inspire each other to go beyond the needs of self, and we need to move into this place of ecosystem, which inherently is about self, but is equally about the intertwined nature and the interdependence of place and our planet, and of course of the other. And what separates us shouldn't be what continues to prevent us or having the barrier for us to come together. In fact, it should be what unites us. That difference should be something that is celebrated. And I can't help but hope that we do return to this construct of hope, that at some point for us all here experiencing Relearn, this magical festival of a new tomorrow, that we then let go of our fears, and that we receive the gift of this kind of new life that we're proposing here, and the profoundness of giving to the other and being open to the possibility of the other and open to the possibility of place. George, Andrew and Phil, thank you very much for being on our wrap-up show today. It has been enlightening and inspiring at the same time. Please enjoy the final day of Relearn, and let's leave this particular festival with the notion that not only is our time now, but it is time for real action, tangible action, and real movement. Thank you, gentlemen, and I wish you well going forward.
The Game Changers podcast is produced by Oliver Cummins for Orbital Productions. It's powered by schoolfortomorrow.com and circle.education. It's available on Apple Podcasts, on SoundCloud, on Spotify and on Google. If you like what you hear, tell your friends, subscribe, like, you know what to do. Let's go.